Do you really have to cut fabric on the grain line? What happens if you sort of ignore the grain line of your fabric? Oh, and what even is the grain line? I'm Meg from Seamwork, and in this video, I'm going to answer the question, do you really have to cut fabric on grain, or is it okay to skip this step? I will explain what the grain line is, I'll show you how to find the 3 grain lines on your fabric, and I'll demonstrate what happens when you don't cut on the grain line. Then I can tell you definitively when you must cut on the grain line and when you might be able to wing it a little bit. So first, what is the grain line? It's the direction that the fibers are woven in your fabric. You want to use the grain line to cut your fabric in a way so that it hangs nicely on your body. It doesn't twist or pull and it looks nice. I'm going to illustrate all of this on some gingham because these cute little checks make it really easy for you to see what's going on. Okay, so there are 3 different grain lines to be aware of. The lengthwise or straight of grain. This is the biggie, this is the one you'll use the most. The cross grain and the bias. Let's take a look at all of these on the gingham. So your fabric has 2 finished edges, which are the selvages. On woven fabrics, the warp threads run parallel to the selvages, up and down like this. This is your lengthwise or straight grain. This is the line you'll most commonly use to orient your pattern pieces as you cut them out. When a fabric is on grain or you're supposed to cut on the grain line, this is the line that we're talking about. Next is the cross grain. The weft threads run from selvage to selvage like this. And it is okay to cut fabrics on the cross grain. It might have a little bit more mechanical stretch than the lengthwise grain, but you can play with stripes and plaids in a really fun way by having them go in different directions. I'll show you on the Sonia dress. As you can see, the stripes go in different ways all over the dress. I'll link to this pattern below if you want to try it. Feel free to cut the pockets, the yoke, cut them on the cross grain and see what it looks like. Next up we have the bias, which runs diagonal between the selvages. This is the stretchiest grain on your fabric, which is why we use it for bias tape. This means it can stretch around curves like necklines. It's also okay to cut your pieces out on the bias. Some patterns specifically call for the bias because it wraps so lovely around your body. I'll put a link to some of our bias cut seamwork patterns below. Just remember you don't want to cut all pieces on the bias whenever you feel like it because that fabric is going to stretch. Okay, so those are the grain lines on woven fabric, but what about knits? Knits don't technically have a grain line in the same way that wovens do because they're not woven together. The fibers are knit together. But we do still refer to knits being on grain or off grain, and knits are often off grain. You can tell if your knit is straight by looking really closely at a cotton jersey, for example. Can you see these tiny little ribs? They kind of look like the whales on corduroy and they run parallel to the selvages. That is your grain line on a knit. The tricky thing with knits is the direction of greatest stretch. Our pattern maker calls it DOGS, which is cool because she loves dogs, but I think it's also a real pattern making acronym. Anyway, knits often have the most stretch on the cross grain, so you can line up your pattern pieces on the grain line and then your fabric will stretch around your body. But sometimes the fabric plays a little trick on you and it actually has more stretch on the grain line. This is also called vertical stretch, which is different than horizontal stretch. So pay attention to the direction of greatest stretch, the dogs, when you cut out your pattern pieces and you will be golden, like a retriever. So after you establish the grain line on your fabric, what comes next? Once you've found the grain line, just match the grain line on your pattern piece, you know, those double-headed arrows, those indicate the direction that you want to cut out your fabric. So make the pattern piece's grain line arrow parallel to the grain line on your fabric. You can use your ruler on either end of the arrow if you want to make sure it's perfectly straight. This is also when you can decide to play with the grain line. For the cross grain, line up the arrow on your pattern piece perpendicular to the fabric's lengthwise grain line. For the bias, your arrow should be at a 45-degree angle to your fabric's grain. By the way, if it's a bias cut garment, your arrows will likely already be diagonal on the pattern pieces. And that's it. So the big question is, what happens when you don't cut on grain? Have you ever bought a shirt from the store and it twists around your body while you wear it and you have to keep pulling it so that it'll sit straight on your body? That shirt was not cut on the grain. So first, if it's off grain, your fabric will twist around your body. You'll be able to see it and you'll be able to feel it when you wear it. This is because if it's off grain, you're actually cutting closer to the bias, which if you remember, increases the stretch of the fabric. In drastic cases, if your pattern pieces are not cut on grain, your fabric really will stretch and grow as you wear it. You'll be able to see it on the garment. And finally, your fabric will appear visually off. It's gonna look askew. If you're using prints like this, it'll be very obvious. As you can see, it's quite obvious on this gingham pocket piece. It was not cut on grain. So when do you absolutely have to cut on the grain? Ideally, it would be always, but you have to cut on the true bias tape for bias tape to work well. Remember, it has to be able to stretch. I tried faking the true bias when I cut out a piece of bias tape many years ago, and it definitely didn't stretch, and I think it might be the most frustrated I've ever been while sewing. You also usually want to cut knits with the greatest stretch wrapping around your body, horizontal stretch. Otherwise, they'll get baggy as they stretch out vertically when you wear them. There is two-way and four-way stretch in knit fabrics, and if you want to know about that, let me know in the comments below and I'll make another video because it's a whole nother topic. Sleeves, pant legs, and other pattern pieces that wrap around your curves will twist and warp, so make sure you cut them on grain. But remember, the cross grain is often okay. So when can you take a risk with your grain line? First, fabric can sometimes be printed very off grain. This is especially true with printed knits or wovens that have a printed pattern rather than a woven pattern. If this is going to really distort the appearance of your fabric, it's your call if you want to disregard the grain line and cut your fabric so that it at least appears visually straight. Also, if you can't see the ribs on your knit and you've spent an hour trying to get it on grain and it keeps slipping around, I give you permission to take a risk and do your best to cut it on grain. Finally, you might be tempted to skip cutting small pattern pieces on grains, like collars, because they're interfaced, and the interfacing will prevent it from stretching. But that really depends on your interfacing because some interfacings have grain lines too. We have a great article on interfacing that I will link to below, and we talk about grain lines there as well. Okay, so that is an overview of the dangers of cutting off grain. With most things in life, I like to be a little off grain. When it comes to my fabric, I really do try to follow the lines. If you have questions, ask me below, and if you want to learn even more about the grain line, look for my next video where I will show you some tricks for getting your fabric on grain if it's off grain. We also have all the information in these videos written down in helpful articles on the Seamwork website in case that matches your learning style. I will link to these articles below too. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.